Accountability right here. Not if he tells me. I'll say we'll go ahead and call the order, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. For March 30th, Senate Appropriations Committee meeting for noon recess. Senator Guru,
Excused.
Senator Hicks,
Excused.
Senator Kinski,
Here.
Senator Steinmetz, Chairman Perkins.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Did Senator Hicks leave a proxy or a vote?
Both Senator Hicks and Guru did leave proxy votes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Vice Chair.
I've got a 1 o'clock joint conference committee call, so I'll be bugging out on you at 5 till, which will deprive you of a quorum.
We better go quickly then. That will first bill for the only bill for our consideration, House Bill 219, Investment Funds Committee membership. We've got that. This is Representative Nicholas and Senator Perkins. Representative Nicholas, you want to take us through really quick on the bill?
Sure, be happy to. So going over to page 2, we're increasing the number of members from 6 to 7 for voting members. And then if you go down to line 5, you can see that were 4, and that's the 6. It makes a total of 7 voting members. So then if you go down a little further, we changed the voting rights. If you may recall that in the past, the CIO of the Treasurer's Office and the CIO of the Wyoming Retirement System were voting members on this committee. It was, just going through best practices. It doesn't make sense to have those 2 gentlemen voting members on issues when they're reviewing the work of the CIO. It's just.
Yeah, it affects independence. There's an inherent conflict.
Yeah, essentially. So that's what that does. But then also we didn't change it, but the appointment by the governor, the ex officio, is still a non-voting member. I can tell you that in practicality, he typically votes or expresses his opinion. And so they get the full discussion and participation of all these folks when they go to these committees. It's not like they just don't sit there and talk. It's just when it comes down to the final vote. And going over to page 3, this has to do with who's the chairman of the committee. So originally the bill was crafted so that the state treasurer would not be the chairman. The chairman would be selected by the board itself or by the investment funds committee. We had some discussions with the good treasurer about that, and he would like to. This was kind of a compromise that we reached with him, just to have him so that he would be chair of the committee every other year. So that's what subsection D deals with. Down at the bottom, we allow some secretarial assistance if it's requested, so that they can make sure that they, if the IFC needs additional services that they want to have, for example, the explanation of LSO, the budget department, that it makes that available to them on request. Then it adds one more member, page 4, it adds one more member of legislative liaisons, so that we have a member of the Senate as well as a member of the House,
Right.
just to get more experience and more understanding and participation by the legislature.
And what are we at the bottom of 4? What are we getting rid of there on benchmark?
So on the bottom of 4 is basically we changed who was voting on benchmarks. At one point in time, I was voting on benchmarks, and I don't have any business voting on benchmarks. And so this is just articulates, by striking it, basically the board or the council as it's made up will vote on the benchmarks, and the governor's rec and the legislative liaisons and unofficial members do not vote on the benchmarks. So that's just kind of completing the rest of the conflicts.
Benchmarks are now set by the IFC,
They're recommended by the IFC.
recommended by the IFC and adopted by the SLIB.
By the SLIB.
you have as much experience and qualification to
As
vote
them,
on
they do.
benchmarks as many members of the SLIB. So, you know, the only qualification to be elected official is get elected, be an elector and get elected. So hopefully they develop some expertise as they go along.
So with that, happy to have comments from Kurt and there may be one or two of the IFC members
Okay.
who may want him to join us if they're.
Okay, well, let's go to you, Mr. Treasurer. Welcome. Good to see you again. Long time no see, like 2 days.
I think the IFC essentially is originally set up to be a advisory committee for the state treasurer and their office. And what this bill has essentially done in a lot of ways is turned it into a subcommittee for the legislature. And I say that because we all have, I think, a understanding that we should have less political influence and more professional influence in the investment process. And essentially, this bill takes it the other way, where now we have doubled the amount of political influence and actually have a staff member of the LSO be present at all meetings. It's problematic for a couple of reasons. One, any comment by any IFC member can be taken out of context and basically spun into a legislative agenda. Two, it's going to be perhaps a chilling effect on the conversation and discourse between the professionals. This is a committee that has essentially the protection that anything that they do is not public. And get right in here. Okay, and so this has the potential for you know, anything that happens that essentially is going to be taken down by a staff attorney that hasn't been necessarily public in the past, which would be used in a very public manner in affecting legislation. And so that I think is a little bit problematic, and that's why you have a chilling effect perhaps on the discourse and the discussion of the IFC members. So that in itself, I think, is a little bit problematic. When it was originally set up, it was set up to have one legislator rotating back and forth between the House and Senate. And the essential reason for that was, as I said before, was to limit the amount of political influence that
I have the difference. Keep going, Kurt. We're listening.
to limit the amount of political influence in the process of investment advice. So that in itself, in doubling that, does I think move the ball in the wrong direction. In the compromise that we did come with, that one, the biggest reason why I wanted to look at having a board member or an IFC member be a chairman was immediately after the election of a new treasurer. And much in the same way that a new legislator isn't going to go into a chairmanship, I thought it was reasonable to have the newly elected treasurer probably set out for a year, get their feet under them and move forward in the second year. I don't necessarily see that to be the case in subsequent years after the election of a newly elected public official there. And, I guess maybe one comment addressing the SLIB board and their qualifications as far as asset allocations and other things. We try to, in manager selection, we do put on a pretty good presentation and educational process in manager selection and in asset allocation. True, they don't understand it as well, probably as a treasurer who works with it on a day in and day out basis, as far as with the chief investment officer, who is indeed the person who does the implementation. But they do have I think, an understanding about the risk associated and the yield and the return. And those are the things that we focus on.
And so, Mr. Treasurer, just a couple of questions. I mean, when you say you're doubling the amount of political influence, you're referring to the fact that now you'd have one from the House and one from the Senate, where before you just had one. Is that the doubling you're talking about?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I think it probably should be clear that it is a rotating position in statute, that it's every 2 years.
Well, and then so when we talk about influence, Mr. Treasurer, I mean, they are ex officio. Basically, all it means is they have the right to attend. They don't have the right to vote, regardless of whether you have one or two. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that is ex officio. However, there is, I think there is that the other problem is having the staff person there, because it almost turns it into a legislative subcommittee if you have an LSO staff in an advisory committee for an elected official. I doubt seriously whether the governor would like to have an LSO staff go to their closed door cabinet meetings. That's essentially what this does, is that it puts a staff person in that. All of the information that would be necessary to develop any legislation can be developed by direct testimony to the CAPFIN committee or the Appropriations committee, whatever the case may be, any other standing committee. So it necessarily, and that would be, directly in context and directly to specific questions, and rather than a process where any statement could be gleaned, taken out of context, and necessarily the true meaning of the statement may be lost. in the
Isn't that true with
conversation.
anybody who attends? I mean, anybody who attends that can take something, a recording or a statement out of context and present it anywhere. Are there any rules that have been developed that says that you're not supposed to do that? I mean, is that something that could be handled by rule?
Well, I think that can be handled by policy. I think what we have done is that necessarily we try to understand what the consensus is. And from my perspective, we try to put forth, every, I guess, viewpoint that's held. And we look at, some of the issues that we've had that have come before us.
So, Mr. Treasurer, I mean, as far as that, I mean, it's certainly it's a may, as far as LSO staff, it's may provide staffing assistance. Can you imagine any circumstance where there would not be staffing assistance available to the IFC? I mean, who provides the staffing to the IFC now?
The treasurer's office provides it. Matt Sackett is the designated policy person, and Matt handles all of that. If it's a legal issue, then usually Lisa Jurdy, out of our office, Lisa Jurdy Spillman does that. it's a kind of I guess, an evolving duties for the IFC members. We've put on a lot of subcommittees of late, so we can energize these people and get them active. And I'm often on one of those subcommittees, but I'm not chairing any of the subcommittees. So they have the ability to chair those, develop their own issues, and move forward. With those issues as they present themselves.
If the IFC wanted to, if the IFC wanted to hear a presentation from a member of the LSO, if the IFC or the chairman wanted to hear a particular presentation of information from LSOs, anything that would prevent the chairman of the IFC from which in most years would, with most years is you or your successor.
Yep.
Is there anything that prevents you from permitting that?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's anything specifically that would prevent it, because I would think that any presentation by LSO, and I think what you're thinking of, if I can be so, I guess, intuitive, that we do need to make some provisions to educate the IFC members on, what the different funds and the stakeholders and what those obligations are of those funds to those stakeholders. So the IFC understands that. And so I think that, we're on the same page on that,
And
Mr. Chairman.
my concern is ultimately is at the end of the day, with respect to having, having legislative members attend, is the biggest issue is knowledge transfer. There has to be some knowledge transfer from the IFC to the legislature. And because it affects our ability, it affects the requirement that we have under the Constitution to provide for the provision of investing funds. I mean, if we're working on a constitutional amendment now, for example, that political subdivisions could come and invest their funds. We could have a wild star, whatever, that they can now invest in equities. I see that as at some point, the legislature has to develop some kind of pool for them to be in, set the risk factor like we do, and then it gets turned over to the IFC and, well, particularly the SLIB board, and with the consultation with the IFC to develop the investment policy, and then you go execute it. I mean, isn't that the way it works?
Well, yeah, the treasurer's office is in there, and the IFC is in there, and we look at the investment policy, and a lot of the investment policy you can actually trace back to a lot of the goals of the Santiago Accords or principles.
And wouldn't you agree that the
those are
legislature has a
embedded in there.
vested interest in? Would you agree that the legislature has a vested interest in how these funds are administered, how the investment is, and what the risk factors are, and how that relates back, and hear that discussion so that they have at least some understanding and can then reconvey that to along with you to the CAPFIN and others, just so that there's a better, we understand what it is that's being done with the state's money.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree that the risk factors, you guys have a constitutional duty to establish those risk factors. And that's something that has to happen. I do think that we need to be careful with the political influence in the legislative process, to where we don't essentially turn the legislature into a 90-member investment board.
I don't think this does that, but ultimately, politics is just a fact of life. I would suggest to you now that there's politics within the IFC, not including the legislative members. I would suggest that the SLIB are obviously political animals. They're elected office. Yourself is a political animal. You're elected office. So politics is just a factor of life, whether it's office politics, backroom politics, or overt politics. Politics is there.
I agree that there is politics in those offices, but the functionality, as far as actually doing something, there's more functionality in the political process in the legislature than there is in the top 5 elected officials, with the exception of the governor. Especially in my office, because I don't control anything that happens with the funds. essentially what I do is I try to put together an organization of professionals that will do an excellent job of investing those funds, and the money from those efforts essentially go into a pot that's distributed to the stakeholders, which I have absolutely no control over.
And that's exactly right. But ultimately, the constitutional obligation of the legislature is to set the purpose and the purpose and of the funds. And not all the funds have the same purpose. I think, we talked about this the other day. Ultimately, the client is not the state of Wyoming. The client is the fund and those who benefit, or the beneficiaries of the various funds, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
They're not all the
yeah.
same.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that we're on the same page there, that knowledge about what the stakeholders expect out of it. And I think that is actually lost, I believe, in a lot of what goes on in the investing regime is the aspect of the income. And income is right in the Constitution, but essentially, I think that the investment aspect until recently, with my emphasis on yield, and return, I think that they've been looking more at return, and you can have internal rates of returns that are in the high teens, but you don't necessarily have any yield that actually goes back to the stakeholders.
Until it's reduced to earnings under the current regime.
Exactly.
It doesn't, it doesn't mean anything.
Which gives us our next constitutional amendment, and we'll talk about
Here we
that
are.
in more
Which
detail.
we will talk about that anyway. We'll have
But,
a lot of good discussions about that.
And I would just say that I think that, the addition of the staff embedded in the committee process, I think is probably crossed the line. The addition of the legislators, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. I know that there was a limit in the original legislation years ago, and that limit was one legislator, and the reason for that was the political influence in the process. So I'm just bringing up the genesis of the way it was.
Right. And let me ask you this, Mr. Treasurer. I mean, the way it is now, the entire legislature has to rely upon the word of this man right here for what happens in that.
Scary,
Would
isn't
you
it?
agree with that? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I've been hogging your time. Any other questions for the treasurer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
Do we have, who else, anything else, Mr. Treasurer?
No, good discourse, and we did get into that income constitutional question. So I look forward to, in the interim of discussing that with
Yeah.
you and the other members.
Speaking of which, have you looked at HJ 9?
No, I haven't looked at
Why don't you take a
HJ9.
quick look, particularly at the ballot proposition
Mhm.
statement? That's on third reading tomorrow, so it's a
Okay.
short time, but if you might have it and see if you've got any, we're just trying to be clear in the ballot proposition. Take a look at the
Yeah.
ballot proposition. If there's something in that ballot proposition you think would clarify or help implicate your office in the
Implicate my
in the
office,
investment of
okay.
those things, so, some kind of, if
Okay.
there, you got a suggestion, be happy to hear from you. on that.
Is this the one with the political subdivision?
Right, for the,
Yeah.
political
I know
subdivisions.
Patrick and I have talked about that, and we thought the way to do that was just to be kind of do a mayor thing, a pool A, but just do it for political subdivisions.
Yeah, and so look at particularly the ballot proposition language. I mean, it's this thing itself, I think, is pretty clear in the Constitution, but the ballot
Mhm.
proposition probably is trying to make it clear to voters what's
Yeah.
going on there. Okay.
But yeah, this bill has got some good things in it, but I think all in all, if I'm not going to cry if it dies, if it moves forward, I think that there's going to be some amendments that I hope move with the process.
Is that now the executive
Yeah.
version of voted up, voted down? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Treasurer?
Try if it dies. Yeah, I don't know, Mr. Chairman. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Who else have we got? We got anybody else that wants to speak on?
So
We have no one in
I
the
got a
virtual
text
waiting
from
room now.
Donald Patrick. He doesn't have the information to get on the Zoom connection. I think I emailed it to him last time. But is it the same as it was two days ago?
No, every meeting has its own link. He'll just need to go to LSO's website and click on the link for this particular meeting that says
So
testify.
he goes into the LFO website like he did before, go to
Mhm.
committee meetings.
Right,
and then
and
look
click
for
on the
Senate
testify link right
appropriations.
beside this meeting.
So just a quick response. So the language for LSO basically was to provide the benefit for the IFC to learn more about our funds and to educate them as to how our 10 funds work and what their goals and objectives are and how then those dollars are managed. Because part of the problem that we have is that the IFC members are looking at more of an endowment sovereign wealth investment program that's for all funds. And they want to kind of wrap most all funds into one basket. And so we need to help them understand what we have and what the goals are in order for them to then to make the most educated decisions on the particular funds.
Okay.
And so that's really the only purpose.
So let me do there because we're going to lose our quorum here really quick.
Either that or you. give me
So
some- if-
either that or, so like, we'll stay here and if Don gets on, we'll more than have to listen to him. I'd love to hear Don's purview on this, but let's go ahead. For right now, we'll close off public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure?
You want to pick up again after?
No, let's go ahead and move the bill. We've already left. We've already got two. Let's move the bill. And
Okay. Move the bill.
Okay, and then I think there's some amendments that'll be coming, but they'll probably end up being committee of the whole amendments. Let's go, unless somebody has an amendment they want to propose right now. I'm just trying to move this bill along. Yeah, so let's go ahead and call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru left an aye vote. Senator Hicks left a no vote. Senator Kinsky,
No.
Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Perkins,
Aye,
2 ayes, 3 no.
okay. Then I guess we don't need any more public comment. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I'll do everything, that you guys need to have that discourse and that discussion with the IFC on the different funds and what they do. And work with you and Bob to facilitate that. I think we have both have that common goal and would, so I think that, a lot of these things, Mr. Chairman, I think that we can do just as an understanding and do the right thing that we want to get done for the folks in Wyoming and for the stakeholders.
okay. And so anyway, I can tell you, I would appreciate an invitation to attend an IFC meeting, see what you guys do, what kind of black magic you're performing in that meeting. Sure, we are adjourned.